Okay, Leo, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about what is narrative fallacy and how it influences our thinking. I will start by talking about the definition of the narrative fallacy, and then I will move on to the cause of the narrative fallacy, which is the search for logical connections. After that, I will talk about how to avoid narrative fallacy and give you a summary. Okay, let me start by what is the narrative fallacy? Narrative generally means the description of a sequence of events in a sequential order. For example, almost all the stories we've heard and almost all the news we read are narratives. And fallacy generally means a wrong idea, but here it means a wrong idea because of bad reasoning. And the narrative fallacy is used to describe one of our habits. That is, when we look at a sequence of events, we very naturally want to find the reason for some of them and make up a logical link into it. Let me give you an example. On December the 14th, 2003, Saddam Hussein was captured. And about 1 p.m. the next day, Bloomberg News announced that U.S. Treasury's rise. Hussein capture may not curb terrorism. But, however, 30 minutes later, the same news agency announced U.S. Treasury fall. Hussein capture boosts a lure of risky assets. This is very ironic and interesting because we can see here that the same fact, which is the capture of Saddam Hussein, has been used here twice to explain both the rise and fall of U.S. Treasuries. At least one of these two statements is wrong, and maybe both of them are wrong because the rise and fall of U.S. Treasuries might have nothing to do with the capture of Saddam Hussein. In this example, the facts, that is, the capture of Saddam Hussein and the rise and fall of U.S. Treasuries are true, but the connections, the logical connections may be false. That is an example of narrative fallacy. Let me give you another example. I think most of us have experienced such heartbroken moments when someone we like ignores us. Then, very naturally, we will start asking why. Maybe because she likes me and she saw me talking to Edison the other day. Maybe I annoyed her too much, or maybe I've got a rival. There's no way for us to know whether these reasons are true or false unless we ask her. So that is the very natural search for a reason. So why do we want to search for a reason or logical connections? The first explanation is that looking for a reason may make us feel better because it can tell us that misfortunes, such as the one I mentioned, don't happen to us without a reason, and it may make us to feel that we have at least a little understanding or control of this crazy world. But more fundamentally, the reason can be explained by Andrei Nikolaevich's rule, which can be summarized as information is costly to obtain, to store, and to retrieve. Let me give you several examples to explain how this rule can be applied to explain the narrative fallacy. First, suppose as a culture we are required to remember two books. The first book is written in this way. 10,000 words were randomly chosen from a dictionary and printed on the book. This is the first book. And the second book is one single sentence repeated by 1,000 times. Which book is easier for us to remember? Of course, the second one, because we can find a pattern. In other words, the logical link in the second book. So we can see from this example that the more logical the information is, the more easier for us to remember it. That is the first reason, or maybe the second reason, we want to find the logical link behind the information we receive. Okay, the second example is like, let's take a look at two styles of bookshelves. Obviously, it's much easier to find a book in Perkins' library than on my table because they are more organized. So we can see from here that the more logical information is stored in our brain, the more easier for us to retrieve. In other words, to find it when we need to. That is the second reason, third reason for our search for logical link. However, sometimes the search for logic and reason may lead us to a wrong direction. Let's look at these two cases. The first is Joey seemed happily married, then he killed his wife. And the second case is Joey seemed happily married, then he killed his wife to get her inheritance. Which case is more likely to happen? Second one? Okay, the answer is the first one. Because actually the first case includes the second case. The second case is one subset of the first case. So the probability of the first case is larger. We can see from this example that by adding a reason to an action, we may change our assessment of probability of this action. We may think that it is more likely to happen, which is usually wrong. And the second, another example has something to do with detective stories. Okay. If we show a detective story to someone without telling him the answer, the end, and ask the person to write the probability of each character being a murderer, it is likely that the sum of the probability will exceed 100%, which is counterintuitive. So we can see from this example that the way of telling a story may affect our assessment of probability. So, since I have talked about the narrative fallacy, then how to avoid narrative fallacies? First, please keep in mind that there are infinite logical ways to connect facts, which means we can make infinite theories to explain some facts. And all of these theories may make sense, but maybe none of them is true. And the second is, so we can distinguish between theory and facts, and then we should favor facts over theories. And we need to refrain from using too many because in our daily life. So, in a nutshell, this is what I'd like you to remember. First is, something happened before another. Doesn't mean that the first thing is the cause of the second thing, and that simply making sense doesn't mean that a theory is true.